do the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan view Deebo Samuel as untouchable? Because the Jets specifically have a lot of ammunition. They've got the 4th pick. They've got the 10th pick. They've got the 38th pick. If the Jets really wanted him, they could make the 49ers an offer that would feel pretty outrageous, right? If you were just doing how many picks do players get traded for? So on the extreme end, and somebody on Twitter just said to me, the Jets wouldn't offer 4, 10, and 38. But what if they got extreme and they did? How untouchable is Deebo Samuel?
Well, I would say the other 2 guys are 2 years younger than him. Both guys, well, DK was born in December. He's 24. I guess AJ will be 25. Deebo is 26 years old and will be 27 in January. So, despite only being 3 years, he was a senior when he came out. Those 2 guys were underclassmen. In a vacuum, you trade basically any player for 4, 10, and 38, right? That would be a historic haul factoring in. We talked about Mac before. We talked about Jalen Ramsey. Those guys were traded after the draft. So you didn't know what the picks were going to be. And as we saw, the picks weren't that good for either guy. So if you get 4, 10, and 38, the value there is stupid. But to me, the value in a draft is also based on the crop of players in the draft. Last year, can you imagine if you could trade Deebo and get Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, and some other sweet player in the early second? Okay. This year's draft, I've been told by many people, the difference at pick 12, there is no difference than pick 5. It's not a top-heavy draft. So even 4, 10, and 38, ultimately, who are you replacing Deebo with? Now, could you get Garrett Wilson? Could you get a sweet offensive lineman that can, start at guard and then replace McGlinchey? Right? I've heard that Neal and some of these guys can both kind of move, but we've seen them do it before. Yeah, they traded DeForest Buckner, who, to me, the defining image of this season, beside, I would say, the playoff win at Green Bay, even trump the Dallas win, right? That the blocked punt and just the moments in that game were just the snow. It was crazy.
Week 18 Rams game.
Yeah, that's another good one, which you're right, because Deebo single-handedly won him that game. I mean, he single-handedly won him that game. He was on a different mission. He ran for a touchdown. He threw for a touchdown. He was fucking remarkable.
The Jalen Ramsey dive, couldn't get it, catch.
And then took him in. I mean, they had no timeouts. It was 50 seconds left. It was insane. He's a remarkable player. He's beloved. And like DeForest Buckner of 2 years ago, who I'm all for value, and I think it's so easy, the value. They traded DeForest Buckner, and we love the value. Pick 13 for this guy, no-brainer. But then you have to use those picks and get it right. And immediately, the one thing, DeForest Buckner goes, and he's even better. So it's there's a good chance for the next 2 or 3 years, if healthy, Deebo Samuel is going to dominate and be a top 10 player. You could use 10, 4, and 38, which I don't think they would offer. Let's just say 10 and 38, which would be a haul. 10 and 38 would blow out of the water what the Chiefs just received and what the Packers just received. Because the Raiders pick was 22. The Dolphins pick, which was the Niners pick, was 29. Could you trade, if you and I ran a team, would you trade pick in a good draft, pick 10 for 22 and 29? You might not. If you loved Micah Parsons or Aaron Donald or the guys that are usually there, J.J. Watt historically, right around that value, you would say no. Because you're I don't want two picks. John Schneider would say, well, you're picking 2 second-rounders in pick 22 and 29. But you're paying them first-round value. So pick 10, it's why I actually gave the Broncos a lot of, the trade they made for Russell Wilson. They gave up pick 9, which isn't just, they didn't give up pick 22. Pick 9 in a vacuum is worth a lot, but in this draft, is it really?
Right.
I think the actual draft factors in. Now, could Garrett Wilson immediately be an elite player? Possibly, because you'd say Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, the last, 2 highest level guys in the last 2 drafts. Now, I know Jefferson didn't get drafted the highest, but have come in and dominate, so it happens. But I think people would freak the fuck out. Because the Niners already feel like they're doing the value move. We'll get into Jimmy a little bit later, right? What are we doing?
Jimmy? This doesn't have the fingerprints of the time that you do a trade like that when you have too many players to afford and you can't afford, you're up against the cap, right? That's not the situation they're about to be in. Eventually.
They have a $27 million quarterback that's not even
Once he's gone, John, they're not in that situation anymore. But also, I think what's unique about Devontae and Tyreek trades, both of those guys played with generationally great, all-time great, and still really good, fantastic, best quarterback in the league type quarterbacks, right? Which makes them really valuable because they're making these plays in the playoffs potentially, for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, Wasp. But
three MVPs since 2018
combined between Rodgers and and you could be more really. But
Mahomes could have won at Lamar's year probably too.
Yeah, but because your quarterback is so good, you could argue we're paying a great quarterback. He can elevate somebody else. That we're not going to replace Tyreek, but we can get somebody because our quarterback is so good and we've got other good players. Like part of Deebo, and specifically Deebo not just being one type of receiver, Deebo being good in handoff situations, Deebo being good in short pass situations, makes him particularly valuable to the 49ers with Trey Lance. Like, I think Deebo, one of the reasons I think he's special beyond the box score is he can be a great player with Jimmy Garoppolo. Not every receiver can be great with Jimmy, with that type of quarterback. And I would say he has the potential to be extra useful with Trey Lance. So I think he elevates a quarterback that needs a little elevation in a way that might be harder for, say, like DK Metcalf is more valuable to a team with Russell Wilson or even Drew Lock with a big arm than he is to Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers.
I even think this, and this is where I bet if Mike McDaniel was with us right now, he's like, I think everyone knows Tyreek as this deep threat, which he is. But if you really watch the Chiefs, over the last 3 or 4 years, how often do they throw like quick screens to him and they can end arounds? Like you can get him the ball of his, let's say he touches the ball, between targets and handoffs 12 to 13 times. I think you can get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage. Tyreek, that is. 3 or 4 times with your eyes closed.
I think he's a great fit for Mike McDaniel and Tua.
And I think
Tua actually can kind of throw the ball down the field, but
that's where to me, I mean, you can run that quick screen to DK, but you're running that once a game. To me, AJ Brown is a true outside wide receiver. That's where Deebo, and you and I have talked about this over and over. You could argue he's worth more than the Niners, then really he's worth more to any team, unless Mike McDaniel got him, but even more than LaFleur. Because the Niners are very, very dependent on this human being.
So, the perception of Kyle, right, before he drafted Deebo was that before he drafted Trey Lance, was that he kind of views quarterbacks as a little interchangeable. We definitely think he looks at running backs that way, but then again, that doesn't make him unique. Most of the league views it that way. Does he view Deebo as untouchable? Does he view Deebo as untouchable? To your point, there are just things he can do with Deebo he can't do with other players.
I could push back even on the running back untouchable. Like when a guy is truly the guy, he rides.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He just views him like most guys. But does he view Deebo Samuel as a guy he would really have a hard time replacing? The same way he views Kyle Juszczyk that way. It just doesn't cost him as much to view Kyle Juszczyk that way.
No, it's an easy one. Even Kittle is relatively cheap, right? If Kittle was a wide receiver, what would he have got after a couple Pro Bowls and the heart and soul of the team? He would have been a $22 million player last year, but instead he plays tight end. Him and Kelsey make like $12, $13 million a year, and their guarantee was nothing. That's where I think this one does get complicated because if Deebo's asking for a $65 million guaranteed, based on his resume, to me, even if I increase his value on like the 49er inflation, what you mean to my brand and my team, I think we're still in the mid-40s. I mean, it's your resume. You're basing everything on what you are going to become, but that's the way contracts work is what have you done, right? Like the reason Mahomes, he was Super Bowl MVP and won an MVP and he was fucking dominating the league, right? Rodgers had just won back-to-back MVPs why he got 150. That's just part of the deal, Deebo.
Well, that'd be part of the Niners' evaluation is do we think he's healthy enough to do it again?
I think it's fair to say that like any NFL player, he could have a 3 or 4, there's an element of luck and thinking right about how to use them. I mean, guys, AJ Brown's gotten hurt, right? I mean, guys can get hurt. This guy has a longer injury history, but I guess my point is that I don't know if you can get too caught up. I mean, Nick Bosa has several major injuries, and they're going to break him off, no questions asked.
Yeah.
Isn't that just part of the deal?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Deebo falls into the category of part of the deal. I wouldn't trade him for 4 and 10 in this draft if I were the 49ers.
I wouldn't either.
But part of it is, do we think we can get a contract done with him? Do we think we can get a contract done with him?
But here's where I would. if I already knew the results. Like, would I trade him for 4 and 10? Well, yeah, if I knew that I was getting Tristan Wirfs and, Justin
Jamar
Jefferson,
Chase. Yeah,
you wouldn't hesitate. But that's not the way it works, because I said, DeForest for 13?
Well,
woo! And then Kinlaw, and now it's like, I haven't seen Kinlaw in 2 years.
You would trade Deebo for Jamar Chase and Micah Parsons right now. A 2-for-1. Player for player. Right?
Yeah.
You would do that
in a heart.
But that's part of it. You don't know what's behind door 4.
Well, that's why everyone's talking about, like, Packers now got some loaded ammo. Well, yeah, they still have to pick some sweet players. And can you imagine, would you argue the first round, whoever their first round wide receiver is, the pressure on that individual is going to be as high as probably any first round pick this season? Because they're a playoff team. I mean,
yeah.
Assuming they take a wide receiver at 22, the pressure on that guy is immense.
Part of the pressure, would you agree with this? Part of the pressure on that player is kind of looking at that player through Aaron Rodgers' eyes. This is all Aaron's ever wanted, right? More receivers, more talent. It seemed like drafting Jordan Love instead of a guy that could help him was part of the rub several years ago, and it created this rift, this chasm that they've had to. What was the word that Peter King always used during the Brett Favre situation? Was it chasm? A chasm in the locker room. I think that's what I remember watching, like PTI. Like, Peter King says there's a chasm in the locker room. That was the word that got used a lot for like a week during the Brett Favre is leaving the Packers story. But, I think that's part of it is how does Aaron, I think with the immediate reaction, part of what made, and this is something that you won't be able to describe to somebody that was like out of the country or asleep for 2 days during that trade. The immediate reaction was partly, Aaron must be furious. And then it turned out nothing's really been said, but clearly Aaron's not furious, right? Because Aaron...
It's been widely reported he'd known for a long time.
That was part of the reaction.
I had read that the Last Dance photo was more Devontae than him, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's where he was fucking with everybody. It wasn't really about him. That's where, to me, he's got the theatrical bullshit going. It was really all about Devontae.
The word, thank you, Brian, was schism. There's a schism in the locker room. That's what it was. I remember that like report.
That's a good one.
Schism. Jordan says Niners wouldn't get 4 and 10 for Deebo. Yeah, I think we agree. That's a separate. We're just saying, like, if somebody else got desperate, how desperate would somebody have to get? Because you wouldn't trade him for a 1 and a 2 at this point.
Yeah.